Check 1 2, testing sound 1 2.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Just some general safety announcements before we start our meeting. If everyone can just take note of the emergency exit at the back of the room, and if you require any assistance, just let Policing Authority staff know they are in the room. As usual, the event is streamed live, so a video recording will be made of this for online broadcast. And also, if everyone can just check now that their mobile phone is switched off, and you should be aware as well that if you're present, you could be appearing as part of the record. Again, as usual, silence to be observed at all times, and if you need to leave the room throughout the meeting, just do it as quietly as possible. And again, this meeting is an engagement between the authority and the Garda Commissioner and his senior colleagues. Everyone else is present to observe, so there'll be no opportunity for others other than the authority and Garda representatives to participate in the meeting. Thank you very much. Chairperson.
Thank you very much. I wish to welcome everybody here today, this afternoon, to the first meeting of the Policing Authority in 2025. Our next meeting will be on the 27th of February next, and all the minutes for the private meetings or public meetings are available online, as are the agendas of all our previous meetings and the record online of our public meetings on our YouTube channel. There are 4 items on our agenda today. The first relates to violence against women, including recent femicide cases, with a focus on domestic violence in particular. We'll also be focusing on economic crime, and then our third agenda item is on policing services for children and young people. And our last item on the agenda today is regarding the policing performance and the Commissioner, his reflection on policing services over the past year and in the coming year as well. I wish to acknowledge the good work of the first responders in the recent storm Elaine, the consequences of which many people up and down this country are still unfortunately facing every day. And I know, Commissioner, your members were at the forefront of that in hard weathers and tough times, and on behalf of the public we wish to thank your members for their service over that difficult time in that national emergency that we faced. I would also, on behalf of the authority, wish to warmly wish the new Minister for Justice, Jim O'Callaghan, the very best wishes in his term as Minister, and the Policing Authority looks forward to a constructive engagement with the new Minister and his ministerial team. Thirdly, I wish to acknowledge the recent receipt of statistics from Garda Síochána in relation to bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, domestic violence, coercive control and sexual assault of Garda members and staff, including all criminal and discipline investigations for 2023 and 2024. We thank you for those recent statistics, and they have been subject of previous discussion in public meetings, and it is a topic that the authority will be returning to at some point in the future. And before I turn to Donald de Butler to the first topic, Commissioner, I would like to note your campaign of recruitment that you wish to launch in the next few weeks, if you'd like to say a few words on that.
Yes, on the 6th of February, we are in effect opening the possibility of joining Garda Síochána for a period of 3 weeks, and we launched this along with the Minister on Tuesday of this week. Obviously, in the programme for government, there's very ambitious targets for recruitment to Garda Síochána, and to succeed in that, we want people to come forward to think of a career in Garda Síochána. I particularly appeal to those groups from underrepresented communities and in terms of our workforce, but also from women as well. And they have been underrepresented in our recent recruitment campaigns. And I would point to, even though we are in full employment here in Ireland, many of the benefits of joining Garda Síochána, it's meaningful work, It's lifelong work. It's work where there is ample opportunity for career development, advancement through promotion or into specialisation, and there's ongoing lifelong learning as well, which is supported by the organisation, both in terms of the initial qualification completed at the end of a probation of a BA in applied policing, but also then availability of other third level education as well as your career develops. All against remuneration, which is well regarded in terms of the responsibilities that a Garda member would take on at whatever rank. So we really encourage people to consider it and consider it as a career. And we are open now to applications right up to the age of 49 as well. So for people who may have considered this in years past and think that time has passed them by, there is an opportunity. And in the last competition we ran in 24, nearly, I think, about a third of our applicants were those aged over 35 who hitherto would have been precluded from joining. So, as I say, it runs from the 6th of February for 3 weeks, and really we are open for business. I think if any other employer was saying, you know, an additional 1,000 jobs are available, like that would be a big headline. And yet we sort of miss those headlines. Yet we are a big employer here in Ireland. We run a very complex business in that we're the sole police service for the people of Ireland, and therefore then everything comes in through our door. So there's huge complexity, but also variety in the work that can be undertaken. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner, and a lot of school leavers, when they're filling out their CEO applications, may not always be aware that a career in Garda Síochána is probably the only courses where you can get a degree which is paid for, your accommodation is paid for, and you also have a weekly allowance for doing that course every week.
Well, for the period of time in Templemore, that is the commencement of that degree, but you have to work at it through your probation, and as you are working for us, you get paid as well. So, but at the end of it, there is a degree. But beyond that, like our SIOs undergo a master's in respect of crime investigation. We have a certificate in policing and compliance of ECHR law. So, and now we've some 4,000 of our staff will have undertaken that course. So there are huge sort of opportunities which are available to you while employment around advancing your education. The BA in Applied Policing Studies is only just the beginning of that, and that runs for the probably 2.5 years of your initial training plus probation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and we look forward to that recruitment campaign. So I'm going to turn now to Donald Butler, who is going to talk today on violence against women, including recent femicide cases and a focus on domestic violence.
Thanks, Chairman. In my almost 4 years on this authority, the issue that has actually shocked me most is the extent of domestic violence. Last year we had 61,000 cases reported, one every 9 minutes. So the scale of this problem is quite frankly, as I said, shocking. 6 women died since the beginning of December. Just a general question, Commissioner, just your overall assessment of the extent of this problem and the steps you're taking to deal with it.
Thanks, Commissioner. Good afternoon. So in terms of the extent, and as you said, one call received every 9 minutes, we are conscious that there may be people that don't call us and that are experiencing domestic violence, and I suppose our message for those people who don't feel ready maybe to come to us at this particular time, that they would actually go to somebody that can support them, whether that's a family friend, a member of their family, their solicitor, someone that they engage with. There are support services right across the country, and there the key piece is to make sure that they're safe, and if they have any children, that those children are safe. And we will always be available to take on any investigations when they're ready to come to us. But in that interim piece, we would urge them to go to some other support agency. When we talk about domestic abuse, we tend to think about females being victims. We're very aware and very conscious that there are male victims also. There can be victims in same-sex marriages, and there can be a huge reluctance to come forward to us in those circumstances. And again, we just urge all of those people to seek out some support from somewhere, and eventually then they may have the courage to come to us. Just in terms of some of the measures that we've implemented to support victims, so you'll be aware that the Garda National Protective Services Bureau will be 10 years in existence this year. We have implemented divisional protective services units in each of our divisions, and they're all fully operational since 2020. Everyone working in those units, they have been put in there through a competition, so there are people that want to be working in this area. We've delivered bespoke training to the people that are in the divisional protective services units. We have established victims' offices in every one of our divisions across the country, and again, those offices are there to provide support and to victims and guidance through any challenges that they might be experiencing through that whole criminal justice system. We've rolled out domestic abuse training across the whole organisation for all of our members, and that was mandatory training that was undertaken. We've introduced a domestic abuse risk assessment tool, and that has been very effective. It's currently a paper-based system, and we're moving that onto, with the support of the CIO, we're moving that onto an online platform. But again, that's every single case of domestic abuse that we attend, we complete a risk assessment. And depending on a number of indicators, if the risk is deemed to be high, there are particular measures that we can put in place to support a victim. And again, we have very positive feedback from that. We have a number of operations in place. We have one in particular where we identify perpetrators of domestic abuse, and when they might move on into a new relationship, we have various measures that we put in place where we notify local management in relation to the existence of that person, and there are indicators then around any future relationship that person might engage with and any future partner. So there are certain measures we can take there where we can monitor behaviour and obviously engage early where those where any indicators of violence are happening. We have domestic abuse coordination teams. So again, these are frontline Garda members who take on an additional role on their units, and they monitor domestic abuse cases in their district, in their station, and they will engage with victims of domestic abuse. They make sure that matters are coordinated. If a victim is re-victimised more than 3 times within 3 months, we have an automatic policy in place where that investigation transfers into the Divisional Protective Services Unit. So again, given the volume of cases we have, it's not possible for all of the cases to be investigated by Divisional Protective Services Bureau or indeed by the National Unit. So our frontline members investigate cases, but if there is re-victimisation, that case will automatically transfer in, depending on the level of violence or the level of abuse being perpetrated. From time to time, those cases will transfer into the National Unit, but the National Unit is always available to provide guidance to local members and to the local domestic protective services bureaus in the divisions. We have daily and weekly analysis then of all of the reports that we receive. So again, Andrew's team provide daily and weekly information around the prevalence of domestic abuse. We have callbacks in place, so we engage with victims. Our new policy requires that mandatorily to be within 7 days of the report being made. And again, that's something that's monitored right from the Deputy Commissioner right down to the sergeants at a supervisory level on units. Our legislation has also been strengthened in the last number of years in this area. There was an amendment to the Non-Fatal Offences Against the Person Act, and that increases the penalty for an assault and a domestic abuse scenario from 5 years to 10 years. We've also increased the scope of the existing offence of harassment offence, and that to include any behaviour that seriously interferes with a person's peace and privacy or causes alarm or distress. So again, strengthening that whole opportunity that we have to initiate prosecutions. There's also the new offence of coercive control, and there's a standalone stalking offence of 10 years imprisonment, and we also have a new standalone offence of non-fatal strangulation or non-fatal strangulation causing serious harm. That carries a penalty of life imprisonment. So again, lots of measures that that have been taken to strengthen our toolbox, if you like, to deal with that prevalence of violence in a domestic setting. In relation to calls then being made by victims of domestic abuse, so we have particular measures put into our control rooms. So automatically, if it's a domestic abuse caller, that will get a priority 1 categorisation, and that means that that's the highest category. So it will supersede other categories of offences that come into our control rooms and get priority. Sometimes victims may ring a Garda station, and again we have measures in place at the Garda station to ensure that the appropriate information is captured. And again, there are other flags we can put on our systems to ensure that there's a prompt response in the event that somebody is in trouble. So I suppose the message really is that anyone that is suffering an abusive relationship, they should seek support, if not from us immediately, but certainly from a friend or a family member or a support agency or their solicitor or whoever.
As you mentioned, it takes considerable courage to actually make a complaint in this area. What advice would you give to somebody who's aware of a situation in a relationship? What should they do?
Well, I think as already been covered, the first Rubicon to cross is just to tell anyone, and we would always encourage reporting to Garda Síochána, but if someone does not feel empowered to do that, at least then speak to friend, speak to their solicitor, and certainly then people who are aware of domestic abuse being perpetrated against an individual. They should report to Garda Síochána. If they don't feel able to do that, then they should seek assistance. It's already been covered with a solicitor, perhaps with one of the charities or NGOs working in the domestic abuse sector. Because I think, as has been stated, once the conversation starts, it's easier then to repeat that conversation. And the issue being, and it has to be emphasised, that a victim of domestic abuse is in grave danger. They and other family members are in grave danger. And the quicker then that assistance can be found, in whatever shape or form that might be, then that should happen. Thank you.
Okay, say I'm the friend that I'm told that there's an issue. What advice would you give me? What should I do? In other words, I've been told there's an abusive situation in a relationship, right? I'm not in the relationship, but I've been told. And the person is reluctant to make a complaint. What advice, if any? What should I do?
So you can come to us and you can have a conversation with us about the situation. We will give you advice. We will tell you what measures and what supports can be made available. And then you will have that information and you can bring that back to your friend who is a victim. And we'll point you in the direction of getting, if there's an immediate risk to your safety or the safety of children, there are orders that can be applied for through the courts. We have provision for a sergeant in any Garda station to look for an emergency court to get an order if there's an immediate risk. But if it's something that's ongoing and your friend isn't in a position to yet have that courage to come forward, well then you can arm them with that information. And as the Commissioner has said, the first conversation is always the hardest. And once it's out there, because oftentimes family members and friends are actually aware, they mightn't have had the conversation, but they'll be aware because there'll be visible signs. And there'll be all excuses, and there'll be a whole piece around being embarrassed, but you're a victim. At the end of the day, these are victims. And the support is there. And then if you know, there are lots of other support agencies like Women's Aid, you have Coon, they're right across the country, and they're available to provide that advice. And once you have the information, then you can make your determination and make informed decisions about what is and can be done. Sometimes people can't see beyond the position that they find themselves in. They can't see beyond, you know, leaving their home, or, you know, but that doesn't have to be the case. They are not the ones that may have to leave the home. You know, there are measures in place, there are orders that can be obtained if people are in abusive relationships to protect them and to put other people out of the home.
And some people may feel that if they make a complaint, they won't be taken seriously. What I'm taking from this conversation is that if a complaint is made, it'll be taken very seriously by the Garda Síochána. Is that a fair assessment of the situation?
No, absolutely. And to point to the resources that we've put in place, the training that we've applied right across the organisation, but particularly the specialist training that we've provided both to the National and Divisional Bureau that deal with protective services issues. And then also we have reissued our policy around domestic abuse. We've brought that up to date, and we've brought that up to date even in respect of the latest European Court of Human Rights jurisprudence in respect of the state's obligations in respect of dealing with domestic abuse. So we're very aware of our obligations, the obligation obviously to protect in the first place, but also the obligation to investigate and provide a service which is victim-centred. We also have an obligation under the Victims Act of 2017 to provide a service which is bespoke to the individual and protects them going forward as well. So we have huge obligations in this area. We recognise that. We recognise just as well there's a steady growth year on year in the number of reports that are made to us, but we're also aware then there's a huge number of reports that aren't made to us, and that some individuals, both men and women, but predominantly women, are living in situations of real danger, and we want to make sure that we do our very best to protect them and fulfil our duty in Garda Síochána in as far as we can.
Thanks, Commissioner. Chairman, I don't have any, unless my colleagues want to pursue other aspects of this.
Could I ask, was there, in terms of domestic violence, was there a spike over Christmas in terms of people who reported incidents?
If I might turn to Andrew, because there was very specific trends that we've seen over the last weeks, including Christmas.
Yeah, indeed, Chair. I mean, the number of domestic abuse incidents reported to us continues to increase. It's roughly a 5 to 10% increase year on year every year, and we're seeing the same trend again in 2025. It's already up 5% on 2024. So some of that possibly is due to an increased prevalence. We think it's more likely down to the fact that there's less tolerance in society. There's more supports available, both from a legislation point of view, from a justice sector, and from a Garda perspective. So we're seeing more reports coming in, which is welcome that more and more people are coming forward. But that was very stark over the Christmas period. It is quite common when people are together for periods, over holiday periods, and that includes bank holidays and Easter, and particularly over the Christmas period. So yes, unfortunately, but again, good more reporting is good. But we reached a kind of an all-time high over Christmas with 1,600 incidents over the Christmas week period. So that's an all-time high on a 1 week period. The norm, again, still high numbers, is usually about 1,200, so it spiked from a normal week, if you could call it that, of about 1,200 up to 1,600 over just the Christmas period. It's now returned down to about 1,200 again, but a very high instance. One of the things that was very notable, though, was that the callback rate and the engagement rate from guards, even though the number of incidents increased dramatically, was that in preparation for that, because we watched these trends very carefully, there was still the same level of engagement and service offered to those victims, the same level of callbacks and engagement with them, even as in a lower week. But yeah, the Christmas period saw an all-time high of domestic abuse reports.
So year on year, there's an increase in domestic violence incidents being reported, which may in part be down to less tolerance in society and more societal awareness of it. But how can you be reassured as a service that the guards are doing everything they can in terms of bringing these perpetrators, when it's reported, to justice?
Well, there's a variety of things going on. As I say, with the new policy, I might just turn to Andrew here in a second again, just to talk about IT innovations and also our examination of outcomes as well. But each of these cases is complex in itself and requires a bespoke response, and that's our duty and responsibility under the Victims Act as well. We've responded to that in terms of the divisional response, the work of the DPSUs, but also then the daily and weekly supervision at inspector and superintendent level around the response as well. And the important piece around this is just the long-term impact and disproportionate impact there is on the victims and the surrounding families, and I'd point also then to our engagement with TUSLA and also then what other innovations we need to think of around response to domestic abuse. So I think we've, as an organisation, we've got to a certain point. I know the inspectorate have a report in draft, and we have seen that draft, and we'll be very anxious then to work through their recommendations to keep, in effect, moving our response forward. As I've said already, European jurisprudence keeps moving forward, and responsibilities that are placed on the state and then as well on Garda Síochána and continue to grow. But if I might turn to Andrew, perhaps just in respect of ICT and outcomes, please, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And of course, our objective is in all domestic abuse and sexual assault type cases to secure a successful outcome to the investigation, so to secure a detection, which is a sanction-based outcome, a charge, summons, or adult caution. In domestic abuse and sexual assault cases, they show lower detection rates. So a program that we introduced with the support of the authority over the last 2 years or so, it went fully rolled out in November 2022, was the outcomes program, where as well as just looking as if an individual incident was detected or not detected, we're also looking then at the reasons why a non-detection outcome was not achieved. And since that program rolled out in November 2022, we have now recorded 135,000 detailed analyses of incidents that didn't result in a detection outcome. So these non-detection outcomes now provide us with an invaluable source of data as to the reasons that detections are not being secured. I don't want to say too much about it because we're planning on putting out a major report on the result of this outcomes project. But what it does show, and we have talked about it at authority meetings previously, is that securing victim engagement and victims feeling that they can be part of the overall process is absolutely essential to securing a detection. And that's no criticism, of course, of the victims themselves. We need to make sure, as a whole of justice system, and in fact as a society, that we can encourage and facilitate and support their participation in that whole justice system. And that is unfortunately, though, a factor, and it'll be shown in more detail in the report, in domestic abuse cases, that in a disproportionately high level of domestic abuse cases can't proceed to that sanction-based outcome to a full detection because the victim does not feel, for whatever reason, that they can't participate in the process. So really it's incumbent on us in the guards, in the justice sector and as a society, because many of these are societal issues. They're very complex reasons as to why people don't feel that they can come forward or don't feel that they can sustain themselves through that process, and we really need to make sure that we can focus on that. But there's of course some good news in the outcomes as we look at that at a lower level. There are pockets where, for whatever reason, it's possible to secure that kind of higher participation rate, and that's one of the things that we're doing with the outcomes, is to see where there's areas for improvement and where, in fact, there's good practice that we could copy elsewhere. But certainly, when that report comes out, there will be messages, for society. There'll be messages, for government, for the whole of the justice sector, as well as for policing. But the really critical factor, I just want to emphasise, as the Assistant Commissioner and the Commissioner said, is that victims come forward, that they report, and that we support them, and there are other supports through the NGOs and their family and so on can support them through the process, because it is certainly possible and very possible to secure very stringent outcomes and sanctions against offenders if we can have the victim continue to participate in the process.
Thank you, Andrew. And the report the Commissioner refers to is a report by the Garda Inspectorate report on domestic violence, which is due for publication in the near future. Commissioner, I don't wish to go into the specifics of a recent case that occurred in Limerick with regard to sex workers, which was reported in the media, horrific attack on 2 sex workers. Can you reassure, can the Guards reassure people from very vulnerable communities that they may feel safe in coming forward, that there may be a perception that if you're from a particular community or have a particular vulnerability that it is more difficult to come forward?
That is our experience in terms of where this violence is predominantly happening. Those who have some degree of vulnerability may be in terms of mental health or addiction or isolation, or for whatever reason, their risks actually are increased. And the route for them in terms of their safety is to report to Garda Síochána, because we will immediately respond. We have an absolute duty to protect them, and we will respond as we've outlined in a very professional and thorough way in order to protect any individual who finds themselves in a position of great risk or indeed are the victim of crime. So like I would say to individuals who are in this dire position even today, they come forward to Garda Síochána. We've also outlined what else might be done. Please seek help, but Garda Síochána is here to protect you, and we are determined to do so. But you are correct, we recognise entirely the correlation between vulnerability and victimisation, and that's very apparent when one looks at the great majority of these cases.
And just to return to the sex worker case, that if you are a sex worker, there is, sex work is not criminalised. It's people can come forward. There's no barrier to coming forward.
No, the individual sex worker themselves has not broken the law. What we investigate, and this very much is our policy, is where there is organised crime involved, and that might be in respect of human trafficking, immigration crime, or a syndicate, an organised crime syndicate, in effect running prostitution, that we pursue them, because in effect they are using those sex workers as a commodity, and often in an abusive and coercive type relationship, and that's something that we have focused on. We are focusing on the harm that there is and trying to deal with that.
Thank you. And Paul McGinn has a question.
Just a brief question, Commissioner. I mean, obviously you've been a serving police officer for some considerable time. I just wanted to ask, in your experience, has the nature of this sort of crime changed over the years? The sort of level of violence and sexual violence that's being committed against women?
Well, I think the difficult thing to report here is that over the last period, and I'm talking over maybe 2 to 3 decades, and the prevalence of violent pornography on the internet, that hasn't had an impact then in respect of the nature of some of the sexual offending that we see reported, in terms of the violence perpetrated, the modus operandi of the attack, and how it's been perpetrated, and the normalisation of violence against women through very violent pornography, and in effect that violent adult pornography is in effect almost an unregulated space. So much of our effort has to be directed towards child abuse online that this violent pornography is in effect unpoliced and is free and is very available on the internet, and available then to anyone really that has a computer or smartphone.
Thank you, Paul. And often these discussions around domestic violence, there's not enough men in the conversation, and it's been really great just to listen to the male voices leading the conversation in the room today. Dr. Debbie Donnelly has one quick question, and then we'll go to the next agenda item.
Okay, thank you very much. Very worrying, but this has been very worrying for many years, and certainly not just in this jurisdiction. How many, do you know what proportion even of the victims of domestic abuse have protection orders issued? And maybe you could say something about how the guards deal with repeat victims as well. Thank you.
Well, in respect of repeat victims, we have a policy that if someone is victimised over a 3-month period, then that investigation would be elevated, in fact, to the Protective Services Unit at divisional level. But that's not to say serious cases wouldn't be referred to them in the first place. In any case, they have specific training, obviously, for high-level intervention and investigation, and that's in every division. So that's a real plus in terms of our response. Against the 61,000 reports and number of victims that we've had last year, I just do not know what proportion of those would have had protection orders in place or indeed expired. But we do see a prevalence in terms of previous protection orders either being in place or have expired. And that's something obviously then which we're very mindful of the past history when we're assessing the risk of the moment as well. That's crucial when we carry out our risk assessment. And in effect now we're stepping further forward in trying to automate that with an app which will be available to all Garda members when they're out at the scenes of incidents, that they can download, they can record information, and immediately then we're in a better place then to know more about that victim for this proper supervision of that investigation and the risk assessment as well.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner. Thanks, Chairman.
Sorry, Andrew, as well then.
Just a quick comment on that. I don't know either the number. We can certainly get that for you, though, the number of protection orders. And just to say as well, the 61,000, that's the number of reports. There are obviously repeat victims in that as well, so the number of victims would be lower. But we can certainly get you the number of orders that are in place. But just one thing to add to what the Commissioner said, what's already in place is that on one of the apps that's available to Garda members on their mobile devices, they can automatically tell when they go to a call. In fact, it's actually flagged by the Garda Safe system that there is a protection order in place. So they already have that information. In fact, they have the protection order with them when they visit the site. So there's no doubt about their enforcement options when they're there. So that information is available to them, and we can certainly get you the macro level or aggregate data on how many of them there are.
Okay, I'm going to turn to the next agenda item on economic crime and ask Anthony Harbison to lead that item.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, economic crime is a very widespread and at times very complex area. So today I just want to look at a very specific issue, which is Section 19 referrals by banking and financial institutions to Garda Síochána. There's been recent publications about some issues in this area, and the Central Statistics Office announced that it was going to postpone publication of the recorded crime statistics for Q3 of last year as a result of the issues. So I just thought to begin with, maybe you'd like to set out what the actual issue is in layman's terms for the public so they can understand what it is we're about to discuss. So.
Good afternoon. So the law changed back, it's a new piece of legislation from back in 2011, and so we've been receiving secondary reports since 2012. Secondary reports are reports from banks and other financial institutions, so they don't involve a direct victim, and let me clarify what I mean by that. For example, if you clicked on something that you shouldn't and you lost a bit of money, and then at that point in time the bank reimbursed you, that would then be reported to us because a crime has taken place, but the person involved doesn't necessarily want to report a crime. So we started receiving these secondary sources of information from the financial institutions, and it was centralized approximately a year and a half ago, back in August of 2023. We centralized it because we recognized that it was not being reported in the same way by financial institutions in the same place. So it was disparate throughout the organization. It was being reported locally, and so we knew that we had the information, but we weren't able to centralize it in a way that we could actually leverage it as intelligence to see what the patterns and the trends are. And so that was centralized back in August of 2023, and so that's led us to accumulate quite a large bank of information with respect to these reports from financial institutions that we're now dealing with. And so that's really how this came to pass.
Thank you for that. And just then, in terms of the issue, can you tell me what your assessment of the seriousness of it actually is and how you're going to handle it going forward?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn it over to AC Willis because her team's been dealing with this. Thank you.
So I suppose the important thing to say here is that there is no backlog in relation to individual victims who have come forward to us and have reported a fraud incident, whether that's a cyber-enabled fraud incident or otherwise. So there is no backlog here. And as the Deputy has said, so we amended the process of receiving reports in August 2023, and that has had an unintended consequence of creating a significant backlog in relation to reports we receive from the banks. So we've been working with Andrew's team in relation to finding a more efficient manner of enabling the banks to provide that information to us, because as the Deputy said, it's a mandatory reporting obligation on the banks since 2011. Just in terms of the reasons, and again, similar to the earlier discussion we had around domestic abuse, there are many people who will not report a fraud directly to Garda Síochána. So we know that it's an underreported area of crime. So this secondary source of information is going to provide us with really rich intelligence when we get all of that onto our systems and when we can actually look at the bigger picture rather than individual cases. So already we can see trends, and already we have identified organised crime groups from centralising the process into the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau in August, as I said, in 2023. And we have people before the courts, both for directing organised crime and for participating and enhancing the ability of an organised crime group. So I suppose that's the benefit of actually centralising it and having it all in one place. And just in terms of encouraging people to report incidents of fraud to us at an early opportunity, we're involved in an operation with Interpol, and it involves 39 countries, and essentially, without going into too much detail about it, there's a central point of contact in every country. So if we have a cyber-enabled fraud and we believe the money has gone to a particular country, and that's one of the 39 countries, we have direct link to actually get that money frozen in the country that it has gone to. And in the 3 years since we've been involved in that operation, over €5.3 million has been able to be recovered and returned to the victims here in Ireland. And equally then, we've identified over €630,000 in banks in Ireland that we've been able to freeze and return to victims who are in other countries. So I suppose that's the benefit that people would realise, that if they come to us early, because the longer it is between the money leaving the account and the report coming to us and that we can intervene, the less chance, I suppose, your chances diminish as that time progresses. But in 30% of the cases that we've sought assistance as part of that operation, we've been able to recover the money. So in terms of then fixing forward, Andrew's team have been working really hard on this issue over the last number of weeks and working with the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau. And maybe Andrew might like to just talk about the fix forward, if you like, if that's okay.
Sure. There's a couple of things to note, but first of all, the first thing to highlight, I guess, is that this new central practice that was put in place, very welcome, because as the Assistant Commissioner said there, this is going to give us a very rich set of data, but there's a very large amount of it. It's a very significant number of reports compared to the number of traditional victim reports that we receive. So what we're going to do to improve the consistency and the efficiency of the process is to move from, currently it's an email reporting system where banks, financial institutions send us an email with individual reports. Those emails can, in some cases, contain many other reports that then have to be kind of opened and dissected manually. So what we're going to do is to create a portal which will make it much easier. It's actually the same portal that's used for banks and financial institutions to report suspicious transactions, which is another type of fraud, and they'll be able to use that same mechanism then to provide that information to us. And then there'll be pretty much automated processing of those so that we can analyse those at a macro level. As the Assistant Commissioner said, a lot of these reports they can be smaller in nature, for example, that might be the result of somebody being scammed on a concert ticket or something like that to the tune of €100 or so. It's still fraud, obviously, but they may not feel that they're a victim, particularly if they've been reimbursed. It can be quite difficult to investigate that individual case. So what this secondary data source will give us is the ability to analyse the pattern. So while €100 may have been stolen from one person, what's much more interesting to us in terms of getting at the root cause is were 500 or 5,000 people scammed in the same way, and what was the organised crime pattern then that was behind that. So having that data available much quicker to us and streamlining and automating the process will make it much faster to be able to analyse it. And in parallel with that, of course, we have the ongoing process where victims can report directly to us. And just to make it absolutely clear, as the Assistant Commissioner said, there is absolutely no backlog in direct victim reported incidents. And since Anthony mentioned about the Central Statistics Office, the CSO this morning has issued a note to their users saying that they provisionally at least plan to resume publication of the crime fraud series at the end of February at the end of February this month coming. So we've been working with the CSO very strongly just on the methodology behind fraud statistics, and we plan to provide them with data during February 24, which we hope at least will give them enough information that they'll be able to resume the time series. So the time series has been impacted by just the sheer volume of incidents that have come in, but we're working on them with a methodology that will allow them to split that out in a way that allows the existing time series to carry forward. And then once we have this automated processing, we'll be in a much better position to explain the impact of the secondary reporting. But the really important thing about this is that it will give us, not quite definitive, but will give us a really strong indication of the true prevalence of fraud, not just the ones that are reported by victims. And that in turn then, as the Assistant Commissioner said, means that we can get at the organised crime groups that are behind these. These are not individual thefts. Obviously, there's very sophisticated organised crime operations behind this type of fraud. And this data will certainly help us get at them.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very helpful. It's good to know that the data will come forward in a much easier format once you've automated a system that strips that back out. And Assistant Commissioner, I think it's very good to hear what you're doing on an international basis, because many of these crime groups don't actually live in the jurisdiction where they're operating. It's almost warehousing of this going forward. And just to touch on the last bit there, Andrew, that you were saying, the true extent of fraud and economic crime then that you're going to identify, does that mean that there is a possibility that Ireland's standing in the ratings could be downgraded, say, at the next FATF, the Financial Action Task Force review? Because obviously every country is graded by the level of economic crime that is prevalent within its jurisdiction.
This issue, of course, is in no way unique to Ireland. And many of the organised crime groups that we refer to there, they operate internationally. They have no respect for borders. So it's well recognised, I think, internationally that the prevalence issue exists in every country, certainly in every European or every kind of Western country. So I don't think that that's a factor. I think, if anything, in fact, the fact that we're able to get at a very rich and accurate set of data, I think that will actually serve as perhaps even as an exemplar or kind of a new innovation in terms of being able to track the true extent of it. So I don't think in any way this makes us unique, and I'm pretty confident that we can kind of work through that with our colleagues internationally to do that. I don't think this is a...
No, it doesn't make us unique, Andrew, to be honest with you, but every country is rated because it's how you respond to it, how you deal with it.
Yep.
And again, perhaps maybe one of the issues that would be worth exploring, or just the reassurance of it, is the current process or issue, is that going to impact on the resourcing of economic crime in any way, shape or form, in terms of what you're doing now and what you maybe need to do going forward?
So we've been slowly upstaffing, over the last 5 years, we have been upstaffing economic crime. So we have certainly more people in it than we had, in years prior. I actually think the opposite is true. We're in the sense that we have 5 people who are doing nothing but data input with respect to this currently. So once the process is automated, it'll give us a rich data source. What we will continue to do is to continue to work on the staffing levels in economic crime to respond to the trends that we see, and with respect to victim-centered crime, where we have a victim that's come forward. So I actually think when you look at this and you step back, we have more information, which is helpful to us. It will make us better in terms of our ability to respond because of what we have. But I don't think it's just as simple as how many people do you have. It's what are they doing actually with their time. This piece can now be automated, which will be a positive with respect to intelligence gathering. But the emphasis on economic crime will continue, and we've had many discussions about that certainly here, and none of that has changed. I think that this will actually help to reconfigure the model in a way that's more effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, or Deputy Commissioner. I mean, I agree it's not about the number of people, it's also about the skills and unique talents of some of those people, because this is a very complex area. Given that this is an issue between yourselves and the financial institutions, I'm just wondering what discussions you've had either for the new system or the current issue with those institutions.
Yes, we have ongoing engagement, even as recent as this morning, meetings with some of the main financial institutions. The new system is a system they already use in relation to suspicious transaction reports, so we don't anticipate, and certainly from our discussions to date, we don't anticipate any huge resistance, if you like, from the institutions to moving to this portal. In fact, some of them had been advocating for it in any event. So I think that will streamline the processes in there, because these are two very distinct reporting obligations. Obviously, the suspicious transaction reports come within the Criminal Justice Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act, whereas this comes under the Criminal Justice Act 2011. But just in terms of when you mention FATF and they make their assessment on the basis of our response, it just might be interesting. One particular operation that's been undertaken by the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau, where there was over €92 million stolen and laundered, and this is across many countries. But to date in that investigation, we have arrested 590 people. 114 of those arrests were under gangland offences. So they're, again, going after the organised crime element of money laundering and terrorist financing, rather than just looking at the individual €100 ticket for a concert or whatever. 323 of those 590 have already been prosecuted. Number of investigations files with the DPP, and 1,311 money mules identified who are directly connected into that organised crime group. So again, these are, predominantly what we see is 18 to 24-year-olds that receive money into their account. They'll pass that on either in cash or electronically. They'll get a commission for it, but again, being dragged in and not realising the impact of actually now you're enhancing the ability of an organised crime group to do their operations. So again, that's just to give you some reassurance around our response to economic crime. And while the unit might be small in its number, it's very effective in its operation in relation to this area.
Thank you, and it is interesting to see how money mules have now developed going forward. It is an ever developing crime type. What I just would like to say is thank you for the statistics. They have hopefully reassured the public in terms of what you're doing and how you're approaching this, but also to say that I think we would all encourage anyone who's been the victim of this type of crime to immediately report it, not just to leave it to the banks.
And I suppose if I could just make one final point as well, I suppose we're coming into February, we have Valentine's Day on the 14th. Romance fraud is a huge part of this crime as well. So, and again, very underreported because people are embarrassed that they've been defrauded. But again, you know, we're here to help. We may be able to recover some of that money. And, you know, again, it's organised crime behind all of this. So, you know, if anyone thinks they're a victim, thinks their friend is a victim, they should encourage them to come forward. Because we may, like some people have lost substantial sums of money, you know, lifelong savings, because they've just been totally defrauded by a criminal, and they're a victim of crime. So they should not feel any embarrassment or, you know, and it's a totally confidential, obviously, engagement with ourselves. But whether it's a friend that knows somebody has been defrauded or whether it's an individual, they should come to us because there are opportunities to recover some of the money and even identify and maybe prevent a future fraud. Because again, we're working with the banks in this space. We can see trends. We can see the same people defrauding the same, you know, different people around the world. So again, with that engagement with the banks, we can make sure that they're, you know, that we put measures in place to prevent reoccurrences happening.
Thank you for that. And just to re-emphasise your point, there is no embarrassment or shame here. This is a crime and they are victims and will be treated as such. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Assistant Commissioner Willis, you mentioned earlier about the recovery of monies. Can you shine any light as to the value of those monies that the guards have recovered in recent years?
So in that operation that I mentioned that we're engaged with Interpol, over 5.3 million euros has been recovered from bank accounts worldwide, where money has left Irish bank accounts and gone to other countries. And then in Ireland, we've recovered over 600,000 euro from victims abroad, where the money ended up in bank accounts here.
So the sooner people engage, the better, and there is a real possibility of that being recovered with engagement with Garda Síochána.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our next agenda item is on policing services for children and young people. There are 3 sub-items. The first item will be taken by Helen Hall, our CEO, on progress to develop a young person's plan.
Thanks, Chairperson. Commissioner, the authorities previously discussed with you and you agreed to bring together the organisation's approach to children and young people into a children's plan. I suppose really to, at a high level, to describe the changes and plans for your work regarding children, be they victims, witnesses or potential offenders. Just before we go into any detail on it, just for the benefit of the public, can you describe what you hope to achieve with such a children's plan?
Well, in the first place, we have to recognise our legislative responsibilities in respect of children as victims and also then as alleged perpetrators. And victims have a special place in our society, and that's been outlined in law and the protections then that are afforded to them at any stage where we're dealing with them, again, as I say, either as a perpetrator or a victim. And I think what we wanted to do as part of the wider government approach in respect of children is make sure that entirely our services are appropriate and bespoke to the needs of children and recognise, no matter how they come in contact with Garda Síochána, just their vulnerability by dint of their age. If I
Just before you turn,
Yeah.
just when you talk about vulnerability there, presumably that would also take into considerations things like disability as well in relation to children and whether children be victims or offenders, kind of.
Well, very obviously, yes, but we have to recognise in the first place that any child who comes in contact with Garda Síochána or indeed the wider criminal justice system has already been afforded rights, given their knowledge and understanding of what might happen to them, and therefore then their vulnerability and what can be, you know, for them an overwhelming because it is an extremely complex system that they've moved into. So,
and in doing this, is it to try and bring consistency across kind of all of the divisions? Is that the idea with having a plan, setting these things out?
well, consistency is demanded of us because, in effect, we must be compliant with our responsibilities. And they've been set down in legislation, so there's an absolute imperative. There's an absolute imperative in terms of the standard of response that Garda Síochána provides nationwide, and we want to be sure that we have a plan then which adapts to that, but also meets the government plan as well. And obviously, in Garda Síochána, as part of the state's apparatus, and our involvement in children would be part of that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And just in terms, we as you know, we go around the country and we've been in most of the divisions across the year now. It is a little bit, a few months ago when we were talking to sort of juvenile liaison officers and even youth diversion, and we didn't get a sense at that stage that they had been involved in the development of a children's plan, but presumably now that you are involving them, or?
Well, if I might turn to Paula, because Paula's leading on this, and those individuals come within her purview, but very obviously their practical experience of delivering of service to children is very important, just for learning points and obviously points of improvement.
Thank
Paula,
you.
please.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. And just to give you some context as well. Thank you. It's okay. Thank you. Just give some context as well. We are, in relation to both children as suspected offenders and victims, the plan is wider than that as well. And there has been, maybe we could just take a short opportunity to outline the extent of the engagement and the research that has gone into this. So while JLOs are one very important resource, the research has been wide. We've looked at peer review of other jurisdictions, we've looked at thematic reviews, and I think back to what the Commissioner said as well, how we link in with, there's several programmes for government in relation to children and young people. The Department of the Taoiseach has recently set up a Children and Young Persons Policy Forum as well, and I'm the nominated representative on that. So as we developed the plan, and we have an actual physical plan now, it's over 15 pages, and it also takes into account and links the programme for government. Well, we're looking at that, the newly published programme for government, but also the Youth Justice Strategy, Young Ireland Implementation Plan, and the National Policy Framework for Children and Young People 2023 to 2028. We need to, we're bringing all of that in as well. But again, some of the research that we did, we also looked at the past consultation with children and young people as a part of the What We Think, and that was a UNCRC reporting process. Children's Rights and Police Questioning from the University College Cork, What We Heard from your report from the Policing Authority, Irish Travellers' Access to Justice, the Child Poverty and Wellbeing Programme. So we have looked at a lot of programmes.
Sorry, Assistant Commissioner, if I could just interrupt you just in the interest of time. Thank you, and that actually was answering one of my next questions, because I was interested in those external insights, so it's really reassuring to hear that you're really doing that quite broadly. And one that just comes to mind, and it could already be on the list, but the way you have an internal, I suppose, reviewer of the quality of your own interviewers, presumably there might be some input from that person as well that has been looking at the quality of when guards interview people either as victims or as witnesses or as offenders.
Yes, I mean, there's been an extensive internal stakeholder engagement, because the 4 pillars of it, just 2 of them have been mentioned, but the 4 strategic objectives that we're looking at are, number 1, improved engagement, because that takes into account some of the other learnings that we're hearing externally. Improved engagement, enhanced safety and protection, which links to the vulnerability, and then better outcomes for suspected offenders, and then improved services for victims and witnesses. So they are the 4.
And when do you think the plan will be completed? I presume, I had a question as who owns it and reports to the Commissioner. I think that's been answered. It's you, presumably. But when will it be finalised and provided to us? Do you have a timeline?
Well, I would aim to have everything really by the end of Q1. There are a few things that we need to engage with some of the programmes and other external government action plans on. We just want to finalise some of those actions, because what we want to do is incorporate them into the plan so that we're delivering that at the same time. But yes, we have that. We want to finalise our internal consultation, and obviously then we will have to go through the process as we do with our also human rights screening it, and then our engagement with staff associations. That's still to happen as well.
Thanks very much. I just have one sort of a final question just in relation to youth diversion, and I know we had a discussion with you at our November meeting just on how you manage the youth diversion programme across the country, in particular referrals of children, you know, that go back to divisions who are deemed unsuitable. And thanks, we received some good information from you since then, so that's much appreciated. In the information you provided, there was fairly significant positive changes, I would say, to try and drive consistency across divisions, really to address some of the significant problems that we identified and you identified back in 2019 and 2020. But I suppose at a high level, sitting at your level, maybe Commissioner and indeed you, Assistant Commissioner, how are you assured at this point that that consistency has been achieved? Do you have any sense of that, or is that something that you're tracking and hoping to look further into? But at the moment, do you have a sense, Commissioner, of the consistency across the divisions?
I'll turn to Paul in a minute, but in response to the work that was done, really 2017 through to 2019 and the report, we did specifically put in place an assurance process in the centre around response. Now, you may remember in that period there were specific changes made to Pulse in terms of the feedback loop, and that one of the big problems was the lack of a feedback loop prior to that. And so a change of process plus the assurance which is undertaken now under Paula's guidance does give us a sense of the work that's going on and the quality of work that's happening as well. There's some 15,000 to 17,000 cases referred every year involving juveniles, so there is a huge workload. So the centre is also then supported by just over 100 juvenile liaison Garda members across divisions. So it is an area that we've invested in, we continue to invest in terms of personnel, but also then process change as well. If I might just turn to Paula in terms of just the day-to-day or quarterly management of this and examination, please.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. And I think, yes, and all of that is in place, but I think what we've really done really in the last 6 months, and I really do acknowledge the work that the analysis service have done with us in the development of the dashboards. I think that is, before it was a very paper-based lists, the work and extreme work that was done by one analyst in particular, working with then the operational people who had the knowledge of what we wanted to achieve. But I think those dashboards and clear rag status and everything really gives that reassurance. We also, of course, engage them with the regional ACs and divisional officers to ensure that they have the staff have access to that who need to bring that assurance, but you can clearly see what's moved to red, what needs an intervention, and yes, it is monitored, and if required, as happens then through our own internal performance frameworks, through either divisional paths, regional paths, up to the deputies path as well. That's how it is monitored, and we want to roll out the dashboard to the other area of work, so that we'll have dashboards across the really three significant areas of work that allows for really clear monitoring from the monitoring committee, the monitoring unit within the National Youth Diversion Bureau.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Helen. And I now turn to Paul McGeehan, who's going to talk on progress in responding to the crime of child sexual abuse and also on data retention regarding children. Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Commissioner, you'll be aware that each year the authority reports to the Minister on the implementation of the recommendations from the Garda Inspectorate report on child sexual abuse, and we'll be doing so again within the next month. It's clear, I think, as it has been in recent years, that there has been a significant amount of work put into this and a significant amount of progress made. There are a couple of areas where I just wanted to check on recent progress, because there, I think, are a couple of concerns that we have. And the first one is that I think last year when we wrote to the Minister, we were pleased to report to her at that point that there had been a data sharing agreement signed off by yourselves and TUSLA in 2023, I think late in 2023. Now, unfortunately, it appears that that agreement, although signed, has not yet been implemented. And I just wondered, could you give us the latest situation in relation to that? Why has there been this delay, and when will it be implemented?
My understanding is that the portal went live on Monday the 9th of November, is that correct? Yes, so that portal is live. Sorry, phase 1 commenced in 2023, but phase 2, which is electronic notifications, that's went live on Monday the 9th of November. So that allows for the uploading of the closure letters and retrospective abuse notifications. So maybe just by way of detail, up to the 18th of January 2025, so during the period of its operation, we have made some 61,000 submissions to AGS via this communications network. They have responded with 18,000 submissions to us, and with this newest addition to this from November, we've had 687 closure notifications and 162 retrospective notifications. The important piece about the closure letters is that prevents a really swift and efficient way for each organisation to know the status of a case, and it's been closed, and it avoids duplication and indeed unnecessary work. So that's moving on well, I think.
Can I just check, does that mean that, because I think previously one of the implications of the agreement not being in place was that warrants occasionally had to be used to get information from TUSLA. Has that practice now stopped?
Angie?
Yeah, so the portal allows for that timely and safe exchange of information between the two agencies, and the Commissioner outlined the number of submissions to TUSLA and then from TUSLA to ourselves. So it's early days, but the initial feedback is really positive. And I suppose it is important to say we have a really positive relationship, working relationship with TUSLA. I co-chaired the National Strategic Safeguarding meetings with the CEO of TUSLA, Kate Duggan. We meet on a quarterly basis, and again, the huge progress has been made in many areas of information exchange between the two agencies at all levels.
And specifically on my question, has that practice of issuing warrants stopped?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. One other area that I wanted to touch upon is the Byrne House model, and maybe it might, given that this is a public meeting, it might be useful if you were able, Commissioner or Assistant Commissioner, just to briefly describe that model and why it's regarded as the sort of gold standard for dealing with victims of child sexual abuse.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. So I suppose the Byrne House model is a multi-professional approach, and it's a sort of a one-door approach for a child, because we know that when different agencies engage with the child, you can re-traumatise that child every time you're asking them to tell their story to a different agency. So the Byrne House model really is when we bring all the relevant agencies together, and then there's one engagement with the child, or you minimise that interaction and engagement with the child. So it was initially established in Galway in 2018. That's on a full-time basis there now, and we're currently working to resource expanding that to all of the regions across the 4 regions. And we have approval to expand that, so that should happen. The other 3 regions should be established in the coming months once we get the people in place to do that coordination. So it's really having a dedicated, specific point of contact with all of the agencies. There's one person that has all of the information from each of the agencies. They engage with each other on a daily basis and on a constant basis in relation to a child, ensuring that the best interest of the child are always at the centre of everything that all of the agencies do, not just one.
Okay, thank you. And I think there's no doubt that that's a significant development. I suppose maybe just to come to the point about the number of the centres and the progress towards increasing the number of them. It's my understanding that, as you say, there's one physical centre in Galway, that permission has been granted to open a new centre in Dublin, but that's not yet open, and that there is, I think, a virtual or remote centre in Cork. If that is the extent of the progress thus far, when can we expect to see other physical centres opening?
Maybe if I could come in as well, just when I did mention the Department of the Taoiseach's the policy forum, the Children and Young Person Policy Forum set up, that is an action actually under the cross-departmental work under that. So there is, from the Department of Taoiseach, it's an action under that Children and Young Persons National Policy Framework for 2023 to 2028. So I would imagine that further rollout would be governed by some of that action as well under that policy framework led by the Department of the Taoiseach as well.
Okay, I mean, I know that there has been some discussion at the Oireachtas, and I think, Deputy Commissioner, you may have been at that at the Children's Committee, and the view of the Children's Committee, having considered this and heard evidence, etc., was that it thought that there should be 10 centres across the state. Now, I have no idea if that is a view that the Garda Síochána would share, or if that would be sufficient or too much. I'd like to get a sense of how many centres that you think would be required in order to deal with the scale of child sexual abuse cases that are being reported to you.
Thanks for the question, Paul. So yeah, you're correct. I did appear in front of the Oireachtas Dáil Committee in relation to this. So you're absolutely right. There's one physical centre, which is Galway West Byrne House, and we recently assigned full-time people to that. We had temporary people in it, so now we have a full-time position there for dedicated sergeant there. So, and just to re-emphasise the whole point of this, and I know Angie touched on it, the whole point of this isn't efficiency around our resourcing, it's around making it easier for the child. I'm sure you're probably fully aware of this, so the child isn't going through multiple assessments, dealing with Garda interviewers in a station, having to be medically examined in a different place, having to deal with TUSLA for assessment in a different place. So that's obviously the whole point of it. And again, I think it's important to emphasise we are only one part of this, one part of it. So the other key partners in this are the HSE and TUSLA. And obviously, as you can imagine, there's extensive financial resourcing and funding needed for it. But from our side in AGS, we're absolutely fully supportive of the concept of it and the allocation of resources to it. So the full-time one, as I said, we've allocated resources to that. The second one is the virtual one in Cork. So again, just to give a sense of what that actually means, it means the Byrne House concept is up and running, but they're not in the one location at the moment. Now the one location for that has been identified. So there's obviously work required in relation to it, so that's progressing. So that's going to be the next one to go up and running. The Dublin one is somewhat more complicated because there's a number of different agencies involved. So the Dublin one will be next. In relation to the question you had around numbers, I don't think it would probably useful to give on Garda Síochána's opinion on the numbers of it. Like I said, this is a multi-agency group. Everyone who's working on this, is completely dedicated towards it. While at this period it looks like there's going to be 3 centres, it'll have full nationwide coverage. So, I mean, that's the concept behind it. But like I say, we were on the steering group of it, very active in it, very supportive of it. Angie's people put a lot of time and effort into it around the policy, around all the resourcing around it. And as the centres increase, we'll increase our resourcing manpower towards it. So.
Okay, thank you. And I understand that there may be a reluctance in to say what number of centres are required, but I was interested when you said that the 3 centres, when they're up and running, will have nationwide coverage. But at the moment, and I'm not sure if you'll have the stats or the information to answer this, but at the moment, are you able to say roughly what percentage of victims of child sexual abuse that approach in Garda Síochána now would go through the Byrne House model?
I don't, but we can certainly get them for you. Obviously, in the one that's been up and running.
You're on.
Sorry, obviously the one that's been up and running for some time, we'll be able to get you obviously more statistics in relation to that, but I just don't have them here. But like I say, we can certainly get them.
I think Deputy Commissioner Coxon might.
I've requested them a while back, just so that
Okay.
we would get a sense of where we are. I think some of the tracking with respect to us, along with other agencies, has not been consistent because it's brand new, to be fair. So as soon as I get more information, I'll let you know. Thank you.
Okay, that would be useful, I think, to get that information and get a sense of the coverage currently and therefore that might lead you to an assessment of what coverage might be necessary in the fullness of time. And I know this is relatively new and it's new ground and you're only one part of the process, but nevertheless it's clearly a significant advance in dealing with victims of this sort of abuse. On that, one other query in relation to that is another of the issues that the Inspectorate touched upon, and which I know a lot of progress has been made on, is in relation to the use of specialist interviewers and the notion that really victims should be interviewed jointly by Garda Síochána and TUSLA. I know there have been some issues around maybe progressing the training of TUSLA interviewers in particular. Maybe you could just give us an update as to where things stand on that issue. Maybe Assistant Commissioner Willis, if you're able to do that. Or
Yes, yep. So joint training recommenced in quarter 3 of 2024. So 15 members of Garda Síochána and 15 members of TUSLA undertook that training, and we have 3 further training courses planned for during 2025. And I suppose the thing to say is that when we talk about the Byrne House model, the joint investigative interviewing is critical to the success of that model. So very good engagement from both organisations in relation to that training, and so we would hope to have further people qualified in each of the organisations as we progress through this year. But the good thing is that it has recommenced and it is up and running.
And would it be the view of Garda Síochána that I think you've just said it, but just to be clear, that the optimum position would always be for child victims to be interviewed jointly, or might there be circumstances where, and Garda Síochána's view would be, actually we think these people, this particular victim for whatever reason might best be interviewed by a police officer?
No, I think given the role of TUSLA in relation to children, it is always desirable that that it would be a joint interview jointly by Garda Síochána and TUSLA personnel.
Okay. Thank you. And again, coming back to the situation as it stands at the moment, are you able to say if a victim of child sexual abuse makes a report to Garda Síochána today, how long would it be before that victim will be interviewed? I mean, we've heard reports previously that there's a target of 30 days, and yet we've also heard from expert sources that, and I'm sure it's something that you would agree with, that it's important that a victim be interviewed as quickly as possible. 30 days seems extraordinarily long to me, but I'm just wondering what the current state of play is, and is there a plan in place to reduce the amount of time that victims have to wait?
Yeah, so I think with that, we have instructions for specialist interviewers all around this. But what's interesting is I think a lot of time people focus on the time, the 30 days or longer. And actually that is not the most important thing in it. From my interaction with specialist interviewers, there's different stages to it. And again, you'll probably be familiar with some of them. The initial meetings, and there can be a wide variety of factors why you don't interview straight away. So it's definitely more nuanced than putting a time on it, a 30-day time. You know, I think we'd be really clear about that, and the interviewers are really clear about that as well. So, like I said, there's different factors that affect the timing. But for us, it's not a resourcing issue. So it's absolutely not a resourcing issue. So it's not the situation that we don't have the people available to do it. It's our approach, the best thing to do for the victim and for the investigation itself. And like I say, I know I'm repeating this, but there can be a number of different factors that influence that.
But, okay, and I appreciate that and accept that, but I suppose, again, coming back to the issue about the joint interviews, at the moment, if a victim comes forward, is it unlikely that they will be interviewed by a joint Garda and TUSLA team? It's more likely to be a Garda member.
You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. At the moment, the current situation is it's far more likely it will be 2 interviewers from Garda Síochána, 2 specialised interviewers. But as AC Willis rightly points out, where we all want to get towards is joint interviewing, both ourselves and TUSLA, and obviously everyone here on senior management. That's the optimal place to get to. But the reality is, as you correctly point out.
Okay, thank you. I'm under a little bit of pressure for time. I've still got a few questions on this, but can I ask one question about, I think there's a new multi-agency protocol in place in relation to the investigation of murder and rape cases involving children, which aims to, I think, turn around cases within 1 year from point of report to point of disposal by the courts, which seems ambitious. That's not a bad thing, but I just wonder, can you tell us a little bit about that and what progress has been made thus far?
Yeah, so that's a protocol that has been developed between 16 different agencies across the whole justice system, and signed at, from the perspective of our organisation, signed by the Commissioner. So it's a real commitment, and it's at that level across the Department of Justice, the President of the High Court, President of the District Court, the DPP, the Law Society, the Bar Council, TUSLA, the HSE, Children's Health Ireland, court services, victim supports at court, accompanying support services for children, Forensic Science Ireland, Probation Service, and also with Oberstown. So I suppose it's a protocol that's designed, we recognise that when a child, either as a victim or as a perpetrator in very serious cases, and the protocol is designed around rape and murder cases, so as to expedite that experience for that child through the criminal justice system, and that every agency is committed to having all of that completed within a 12-month time period. Now, it will place significant pressure across all of the areas, but I think the fact that everyone has bought into it at that really senior level, we all want to ensure best outcomes for children at whatever, if a child ends up being a suspect in a murder case, for example, there are reasons behind why that happened that are broader than the actual event that brought them there. So we all recognise that, and across that whole justice sector, it is recognised. So that is the aim of the protocol. It has been signed, and it will be launched very soon.
And from Garda Síochána's perspective, I know again you're only one part of that process, but are you satisfied that from your own perspective that you have sufficient resources in place to deliver on your side of the protocol?
I think children are always something that we would prioritise, particularly for these serious cases such as rape and murder. So we have already done a communication piece with all our senior investigating officers, informing them of the protocol. We've had Ms. Justice Biggs speak about the protocol at the recent Senior Investigating Officer conference, which was happened last week, and there was a whole panel discussion around the protocol and what the implications are. And of course people have concern that they may have capacity issues, but I think even without the protocol, from our perspective, these are cases that we would always be prioritising in any event.
Okay, thank you. I had one other question before I move on to the retention of data, which I'll deal with very quickly, but it's in relation to the investigation of sexual abuse of children in care, and I know there has been some work done on that recently. I don't know if you have any statistics in relation to, I've got a statistic, there are 114 cases and 46 ongoing investigations in relation to that issue that are being carried out, I think, jointly between yourselves and TUSLA. 114 cases, I just wondered, neither of those figures, it seems to me, reflects or necessarily reflects the number of actual victims. So in other words, 114 cases could be several hundred victims. Do you know how many victims are represented by that number of investigations or cases?
I think we'll have to come back to that. I just, by way of assurance to you, this is an area that we keep very close contact and overwatch, and we've specifically reviewed complaints and reports over periods to make sure that we, in effect, we weren't missing either systemic abuse of children in care or targeting of specific individuals. So we'll report further then in regards to just the work that's ongoing in respect of that.
Okay, thank you. And I think it is something that we'd like to pick up again at a future meeting, perhaps. Just a couple of questions then in relation to an issue around the retention of data relating to children. And Commissioner, you'll be aware that the Inspectorate published a post-implementation review in December last year in relation to this. I know there had been an earlier Inspectorate report in 2014 that made a significant number of recommendations. I think there were concerns then that intelligence records for children had been created and that a pulse record was then created as a consequence, so children may have had a pulse record going forward for the rest of their lives even though they weren't involved in any criminality. I think, as I say, a lot of work has been done on that to try to improve the situation. But I think when the Inspectorate went back to sample further records, it did find that in the period between 2015 and 2020, there were intelligence records created that still didn't comply with Garda policy. And they made a recommendation that there should be an audit of those records in order to remove them. Has that audit commenced? And can you tell us about any progress that's been made in relation to it?
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So, in short, the review has issued 10 further recommendations. They present as 6, but if you break them down, there's 10 individual ones which we are working through at the moment. They are all sensible in nature. I think they're all potentially valuable, but at the same time we have to look at each because some of them are quite technical in nature, so whether or not they are possible in the short term is an issue that we just need to consider. So it is presented that there are records, intelligence records in respect of children under the age of 12 created outside of what we have set in place as necessary. So that can happen, for example, where there might be a threat to the child, there might be a significant welfare issue to the child. There is a system in place where an individual Garda cannot create a record of that nature. It must be recommended by the criminal intelligence officer for the area and then approved by the superintendent for the area before it can even be created. And as part of that process of creation, when you enter a date of birth, which clearly would put the person under the age of 12, a pop-up screen appears. It explains that you can't do this unless you've got all of those approvals. It won't allow you to go forward, and you must also complete an online assessment criteria form which confirms that those steps have been taken. So we need to look at this data which is presented. This does not correlate with what we're aware of. So for example, after the first inspection report, a number of measures were put in place broadly, enforcement in terms of internal enforcement, engineering and education, and that brought the figures of intelligence records in this category down to 400 in 2020, 118 in 2021, 72 in 2022 and just 7 last year. So a long way of answering your question. The first sensible step for us is to engage in an audit of this data, and we've already engaged with Andrew O'Sullivan's team, and that in the middle of this month that process commenced.
And how long, Assistant Commissioner, do you think that process might take?
Andrew, can you offer any guidance?
Yeah, it won't take very long. So as Assistant Commissioner McElgunn outlined there, we introduced a process in 2020 which has now pretty much eliminated the incorrect creation of intelligence records. So what we're doing is really looking back over to see if there were any legacy ones that were there. So that audit report is in progress. It won't take very long to produce, probably sometime in the next couple of weeks, and then there'll be an exercise led by Mick's security and intelligence team to go through those to see if there's a legitimate reason to retain those records. And just to be clear as well, as Mick said, from a data protection perspective, this is under the Law Enforcement Directive, so there are reasons why some of them should be retained, but obviously if it's not necessary and proportionate for the prevention, investigation or prosecution of crime, then we've no business retaining them and they'll be deleted. So that'll be, the candidate cases, I guess, will be identified for all children, certainly under the age of 12, and then they'll be reviewed to see if it's necessary and proportionate to retain that data. And obviously sufficiently anonymised, etc. Is there any reason why the authority can't get a copy of that audit report when it's completed? Well, the report actually itself will identify the potential cases, but I'm sure we can do some kind of a summary that says this is what was identified, this is the number of reviews that were carried out, and then this is the number that we propose to retain, and this is the number that have been removed. I'm sure we can get you some kind of a summary along those lines. Yeah. Thank you. Can I just be clear, Assistant Commissioner? You said that one of the circumstances in which I think an intelligence record would be created even now is in relation to a concern around child welfare. Why does a concern around child welfare require an intelligence record to be created?
It's an anomaly of the system in a way. So on Pulse you've sort of two things, if you like. You've got an incident which gives broader and deeper information about something that happened and it links individuals to it. And then you may just have an intelligence record about an individual. So some of these incidents, because of their very sensitive nature, are restricted. So it means that operationally Gardaí or dispatchers do not have access to that information. So if they were to deal with a call that involved a child, their only access to any information that might alert them to an immediate welfare matter or a threat matter, including potential welfare issues for the responding officer, is through this intelligence record. But and I appreciate that. I suppose that, in other words, officers going to a property might need to know that there is a child at the house, etc., and maybe a child that might have vulnerabilities or whatever. But why does the identity of the child have to be included in the intelligence record? I mean, surely it's possible, I mean, and maybe we're talking at cross purposes, but surely it's possible to have, there is a 3-year-old child in the house, as opposed to a name and a date of birth, etc. Yeah, well, I think technically... The children weren't being specifically targeted. Yeah. Sure, yeah.
Paul, I think, and Mick just touched on it right at the end there, it's around if, say, that person was was under threat themselves, so the child themselves was a target for some reason. You could have a position like that. Like, unfortunately, we have organised criminal groups who do all sorts of intimidation against each other. I mean, the reality of it is we have some people who go to school, they're wearing bulletproof jackets, bringing their kids to school. And we definitely know in the past we've had situations where different organised groups have threatened to do various harms to children on other sides of groups and all stuff like this. So that would be, now, I mean, these are quite unique circumstances. I mean, that you would have an intelligence record created around that. And obviously, with a very specific case like that, we would need to know the detail of the child. So that, but like I say, these are very unusual, and like Mick has rightly touched on the numbers, you know, the yearly numbers, but like they would be unusual ones, very unusual ones. I hope that's useful.
Okay, thank you. Final point on this, Commissioner, there have been concerns expressed around this issue in the past by, amongst others, ICCL, that the creation of the intelligence records contained an element of racial profiling. Now, I understand that the system doesn't hold data in relation to that. So how, in those circumstances, can you give reassurance that it doesn't reflect a degree of racial profiling?
Well, this has been highlighted on a number of occasions. Certainly, it's written front and centre in the inspectorate's comments and the risks around that. So you can see the small numbers that we're dealing with, the route by which these records are added to Pulse, And actually, you know, as at the last question, we've touched upon the pretty extreme position that we find ourselves in, where we often have to add this in. And in the end, a lot of this is actually around the protection of proper protection of that child. So I think the governance process we have gives me an assurance, and the low numbers gives me an assurance as well, in terms of just how this is being approached and the rigour by which these which is applied in making these records on pulse if necessary.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. And Helen has a quick question, and then we'll return to our last agenda item.
Thanks very much. Commissioner, just to return to some of the earlier conversations on the information sharing protocol with TUSLA, and I know that was signed last year, and I know we talked about the warrants issue, but can I just clarify that in relation to the information sharing regarding actual investigations, our understanding is that the policy on effecting that is still being considered by the senior leadership team. Is that accurate? Because I think that's preventing the TUSLA information sharing for investigations from proceeding, and that warrants still might be needed. So it's just to clarify, because I think there's a difference between the portal for the notifications and the actual getting of information and really affecting that TUSLA and Garda Síochána information sharing protocol.
Yeah, so that protocol is actually with our data protection side at the minute. It's with the data protection officer around the data protection assessment that's required. So once that's signed off, there will be absolutely no need for a warrant. So I should clarify that in some circumstances, depending on the type of information we're looking for, warrants may be required now. But once that protocol is signed off, that need should not be there anymore. And it is, as I say, it's more or less completed, just finalising that impact assessment at the minute.
And are we talking kind of weeks? Because I suppose in
Yes.
effect, we are. Okay,
Yeah,
we might
just a
return
couple
to
of
that
weeks.
at the private
Yeah.
meeting in February then, just to get an update from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I just add there in respect of that there's been a number of major investigations that we've engaged in recent months along with TUSLA, and we've had 100% support, and there's been no need to in effect seek a warrant. There's been full transparency and exchange of information. So like this is narrowing down to a very bespoke number of cases then, and we really wish to resolve this position then. Thank you.
Sorry, I think that just getting it signed will make it much easier for frontline officers in terms of their interactions and not having the bigger cases. And I've no doubt there is very good relationships between the two agencies, but I think it'll be good. We will come back to it just to find out in February. Thank you.
Paul has a very quick question.
Well, I mean, Commissioner, I accept that, but there have been media reports in the not very recent past that warrants were issued in relation to ongoing investigations. And I asked a specific question earlier on as to whether or not that practice had ceased, and was told that it had ceased. And now there seems to be a degree of ambiguity around this.
Yeah, so in general it has ceased, but there are some particular, depending on the particular investigation, some members have had to get warrants in the recent past, but as has been alluded to, the protocol, when it's signed, and which we believe is very eminent, will remove the need to get warrants anymore. And then we make sure that everyone across the organisation is aware of that position.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to our last agenda item. Deborah Donnelly is going to lead on this with regard to policing performance and the Commissioner's reflections on 2024 and going into 2025. Debbie.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Commissioner, we're at a time of the year, beginning of the year, where we have all been reflective at some stage in terms of what has happened in the past year. In terms of the performance of Garda Síochána, can you just tell us what for you have been the highlights in terms of the achievements and also the challenges that you have faced in terms of the delivery of the 2024 policing plan? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And lots of ways, I'm very pleased to actually have the opportunity just to maybe set out some of what's been achieved over the previous year, and then what we can look forward to in the coming year as well. I would touch upon first the operating model. 18 divisions have now fully aligned to the operating model, and the remaining 3 divisions will finish out next year. And that touches upon a lot of things that we've talked about here today around supervision of standards, be it around investigation, behaviours. If we set a standard, then we're able then to look at that standard and then see where we can advance it. So it is about an approach that we can be sure is uniform across the country when we're dealing with domestic abuse or child abuse. And at its heart, that's what the operating model is about. It is about the overall standard and consistent standard across the country. Our own Protective Services Bureau, they further progressed the expansion of the high-risk victim support programme, and our 7-day callback rate for domestic incidents has remained high throughout the year at 74%, and there's been numerous media campaigns to raise awareness about domestic abuse and domestic violence and providing guidance to individuals as well. The DOCB themselves, the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, have seized some 82 million worth of illicit drugs, and we've taken the feedback in respect of weights as well, and we'll apply that in future reporting. But also then 20 firearms and almost 1,000 rounds of ammunition and 3.5 million in cash. So together with very significant arrests being made, together with then the other national bureau who are looking at organised crime. So a successful year for them. We were able to transfer the responsibility for online immigration registration and renewals to the Immigration Service Delivery, and that's been completed. And that then enables Garda immigration officers to transition then towards properly dealing then with immigration crime. So that's been an important development throughout the year. We've had a strong focus on roads policing throughout the year. In 2024, we still had 161 deaths on the road, the 6% drop on the previous year, and 1,237 serious injury collisions, and that was a decrease of 8% on the year before. But again, far too many people are speeding, far too many people are driving under the influence of drink and drugs, lack of attention because of mobile phones, and also not wearing seat belts. And I would say one of our fixed cameras in an 11-day period detected some 800 breaches of speed limit, and in one case detected the same vehicle on 7 occasions breaching the speed limit. So obviously then all of those are cases that we'll pursue, but again it's identifying those who are really disregarding safety of themselves but also other road users. Around just then internally, we have an ongoing focus around health and well-being within the organisation. That's manifested itself. We were the first organisation to lift the mental health first aid training. Over 60 trainers has taken place, and that's allowed some 2,200 Garda personnel to be trained on mental health first aid throughout 2024. So we'll carry this on into 2025 and forward as well. We've touched upon the attitude survey, and again we'll be pursuing that because that does give us important feedback, and we've touched upon where we might do well as having great pride in some of the results, and it does show, I think, the community focus and responsiveness of the great majority of Gardaí as they go about their duties. And we were able to present on this in Europol to a whole contingent of police leaders from across Europe, and our figures were stood very, very favourable comparison when we compared with other nations. So that was very positive. We've now had the 8th intake for the Policing and Human Rights Law in Ireland course. So that's now 4,000 of our Garda personnel have completed that course up to the end of 2024. And that's part of the work then we want to do to embed human rights in the organisation. Our own data and technology vision kept on developing throughout 2024. There was things which were very notable around the pilot, body-worn cameras to support everyday operational policing, but also then things that are more about the underpinnings of the organisation. So the investigation management system, further release in respect of that, but also then the human capital management system and tender being drawn up for that as well. So, and a lot of the year as well was spent in preparation for the new Police and Security and Community Safety Act too. So, and that'll hold us in good stead for the year ahead. There were then areas which were either amber or off target, and obviously then they will be carried forward into 2025. And we are at this position, obviously, which you're well aware of, around our planning cycle, where we were planning, we're anticipating new legislation, but still remain under the 2005 legislation. So that planning process carries on, and then will be picked up when the new legislation then is enacted. So the other thing I'll just point out too is we had an introduction of a new roster, and that'll be subject to review throughout the year. And also then additional protective equipment was procured for Gardaí, and that has included public order equipment, but also general patrol equipment. We're soon to release headgear, which will be protective blunt trauma headgear for all uniformed Gardaí, and also our fleet has grown to 3,560 vehicles, and we're soon to be in receipt of 2 water cannon as part of that fleet as well. So 2024 was a year of, I think, advance for the organisation, backed up by the investment that there is and the support for the organisation expressed at the government level. And we hope then 2025 just to continue to build on that. But I think the biggest challenge for us still remains Garda personnel numbers against a growing population and changing demand as well. Again, we've spoken quite a bit about domestic abuse, but those 61,000 incidents all require a bespoke response, and that is set out clearly in our own policy. It's a requirement upon us, and all of that is then very resource intensive. And also then we've spoken about online fraud. It has to be said that fraud, and Anthony used the expression warehouse, but this is being directed at us in an industrial scale, often by individuals who've been subject to human trafficking and modern day slavery, pulled into, in effect, crime warehouses to engage in this. So the scale of some of what we have to police is moving on and changing, and does require, growth in Garda numbers, but also then new ideas about the skills that are within the organisation and how we acquire those skills. So further enhancing the roles also for Garda staff, and that's important around cyber, fraud, and other areas then where Garda staff can successfully displace Garda members or undertake part of their duties. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. And in terms of looking forward to this year, what can you say to the community and to your own organisation about the expectations for delivery? What are you going to deliver this year, and indeed the challenges that you face in doing so, in meeting your expectations?
Well, I'll start again probably at the point I finished off on. We're launching a new recruitment campaign, and so what we'll want to see this year is tangible growth in the size of the organisation in terms of Garda members, but also then a re-emphasis then on Garda members doing operational duty. That's very clear in the programme for government, and we'll want to fulfil that ourselves. We recognise very much what's been said around Garda visibility, and then that speaks a lot to how safe people feel when they're going about their daily business, but also the impact that we can have on their safety, and I'm particularly thinking about road safety, continuing on with the emphasis and ongoing investment into roads policing, but also then the involvement in all uniformed members in 30 minutes of enforcement. That will remain a priority, together then with further automation of detection of speeding through the introduction of speed cameras as well. We'll also then want to further enhance what we're doing in respect of domestic abuse. We've covered that here and set out some of the things that we'll want to undertake. But then beyond that again, then I think the other areas then look to really addressing the public's concerns. You can see a huge concern about the prevalence of drugs and also then drugs intimidation. We're very alive to that, and we're very alive to the corrosive impact that can have on communities. So like our international, national and local focus around combating drug trafficking and drug dealing, that will continue as well. Yep.
Commissioner, if I could just quickly come in there. Often the focus we've mentioned a few times here today is on recruitment and the numbers, and increasing the numbers within Garda Síochána. And you know, politically and around this room, there's nobody that disagrees with that. But there's an awful lot that you can do within the resources that you have. And a good example of that in terms of visibility is an example you've outlined in relation to the 30 minutes of roads policing each member is required to do, and which you asked members to do in April of last year. And then we could see the difference that action made come September. And you know, every death on our roads is absolutely regrettable. But the statistics showed that last year there was a minor decrease in the number of fatalities and the number of road incidents. So the point I'm putting to you essentially is that within the resources that you have, there are ways in which you can increase visibility. And that's one such example. And perhaps there's other ways in which that visibility can be increased as well.
Well, fundamentally, we have far more management information now than we'd have had 3 or 4 years ago between RDMS and Garda Safe, and how then we know how people are deployed and how available they are. And there is not then a number that is under analysis, and then work will then flow to make sure then that we are able to maximise our presence out in the ground and the visibility. That is actually within the programme for government as well, and I think in the near future then specific targets are going to be set in respect of that, and that's fair enough. People want to see Gardaí and want to see visibility, and that's important to us as well. But if you sit in my position, you believe in policing, you believe you can make a difference, and I think we do make a difference. We just want to do more and more to make sure that we keep people safe. Within the resources that we have, I do think there's also then, should I say, a shift in our thinking as well about who should be deployed to do what. And Garda members, with all the powers that they've available to them, should predominantly be engaged in some form of policing operations. And now that can be uniform, visible work, or indeed it can be detective work. But there is, I think, an imperative upon us to maximise the operational output of the organisation and the outcomes that we achieved, and that's by maximising also the use of our support staff. So we are at our largest point as in global numbers as an organisation that we've ever been, and challenges come as we seek to grow, but those are good challenges to have. But there's considerable and further investment will be required, particularly around estate and also fleet as well.
Thanks, Commissioner. And of course, some of that action in terms of deployment will be conditional upon you meeting the targets, the programme for government targets for recruitment, to enable you to do that. How confident are you that this year that you will meet those targets? Because it's quite a jump from recruitment over the past couple of years.
Well, the numbers who will actually attest this year are nearly baked in, because the majority of those are already in training. So we know the numbers that have joined the last 3 intakes, plus then we have this final March intake who will graduate in around November. So in effect we will have 4 graduations this year. So it's we want to maximise obviously the March intake, but then we want to be sure then that the subsequent June, September intakes are maximised, and going forward then. And that's why we're launching this campaign in February, to make sure in effect that the pipeline of those who've applied and interested in working through the process, what from our side is also required is to make sure that the experience of the applicant is a positive one in terms of connection to the process, and also then the expedition with which they move through the process as well. So we know where in effect the bottlenecks are, and then what has to be done then to deal with those. We are looking at a new physical test, and that's to be signed off, physical assessment, and that's to be signed off very shortly, and we'll apply that then immediately to this new campaign.
Thanks, Commissioner. You've invested very significantly in technological advances, and we've seen the advantages of that over the past number of years, in recent years. What are your priorities for those advances in the coming year?
I feel I should turn to Andrew, but I think there's just a number of things I want to say in the first place. We've had huge strides forward in terms of the ICT that's available to Garda members. There's more that we want to do in terms just of maybe the less glamorous underpinnings around HR and finance and the management information then that's available to us about how the very considerable public investment there isn't in Garda Síochána is actually accounted for and is kept track of. But also then just the experience of the Garda member and Garda staff in terms of our ICT that we've and there's areas there we still have yet to visit in terms of the custody records, etc. The further rollout and the completion of the investigation management system rollout, but also then the development of the digital evidence management system. So there's a whole set of pretty complex and then obviously then the body-worn video. So there's some very complex projects still to be delivered, and that's not a year's work, that's probably 5 years' work. But if I turn to Andrew, just...
Sure, thanks, Commissioner. Yeah, you've touched on some of them already. I guess they fall into 3 categories, as the Commissioner touched on there. There are policing systems, and a major focus for us there is the notion of digital evidence management to cope with the massive volumes, not just from body-worn cameras, but also CCTV and other forms of data. But the essential piece there is that it's not just about the management of the data, it's also how we can discern information and intelligence from absolutely massive amounts of data, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of hours of footage in some cases. So an essential component there will be the use of advanced analytics and the use of artificial intelligence, obviously in a way that is respectful of data protection and is done with public trust. We use the term, sometimes it's used that there should be a human in the loop of the process. We actually use the reverse, which is that the computer is in the loop of a human decision process. So we will continue to follow a policy where every single decision that could impact on a person will be made by a person and not by a machine. So, but absolutely, artificial intelligence is an essential component there. We are growing our data science capability through recruitment. I think you may have seen earlier on, we have a kind of head of data science that's just been appointed, or sorry, hopefully was appointed to the data architecture team. And then on top of that, they'll be developing some very advanced techniques, as they've already done a major investigation. So that's an essential component for us, and a really key component there will be the partnership between the technology side and the business side as well. As the Commissioner mentioned, another area of focus for us is the investment in corporate systems and the ability in particular to link corporate data to policing data to get some real insights into how our resources are being used. And the one final piece, which sometimes the corporate systems get forgotten about, but the one that always gets forgotten about is the infrastructure that underpins all of this. That's the network infrastructure, things like cybersecurity. So that's another area of kind of major investment for us. But I mean, our investments are balanced across data technology, across those three areas, and keeping them in sync. So the policing systems, the corporate systems, and the necessary infrastructure that means that we continue to be agile and can continue to innovate and to deliver at scale.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Chair.
There's one other area I would just touch upon because it's going to really start to dominate, become a bigger issue throughout this year and then into next year, and that's the EU presidency in the latter half of 2026, because there'll be a huge policing demand. So as well as just keeping the normal business going, there'll also obviously be successfully making sure that we're in a position to protect those events and make sure that they in effect go off without any sort of policing or security hitch. So that is going to require very considerable and extraordinary deployments of Garda personnel, but we're thinking now already what the training, what the skills and the numbers of personnel we require, and therefore their training requirement and how that's going to be delivered then over the next period. And time's already ticking away, and we're 17 months away from that commencing, which isn't actually that long given what all we have to scale up for. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. Helen is just going to outline briefly the actions from this meeting, and then I'll conclude very briefly. So we'll conclude in about 2 minutes.
2 minutes, no pressure. So we agreed, as from my notes, we have 7 actions during our meeting in private. We had asked about previous interactions between the Garda Síochána and the 6 women who were murdered since the 1st of December, which identified any risks, and you agreed that you would provide us with just a short written report on any such indicators or previous interactions. Then from the meeting in public, a copy of the report on the outcomes from domestic and gender-based violence investigations. Then the number of protection orders in 2024 with information about repeat offenders. And then we talked about you providing us with the number or percentage of cases of child sexual abuse that benefit from using the Byrne House model, the number of victims of child sexual abuse who are children in care, and particularly how you monitor such vulnerable children. And then a summary report on the audit that's ongoing regarding intelligence records and children. And then lastly, I think the confirmation that that policy on the data sharing agreement with TUSLA is finalised and in effect. And that's it, I think. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to conclude the meeting and thank everybody for watching and their patience. And the next meeting of the Policing Authority will be on the 27th of February.